Is the title clickbait? Well, yes, but only because you can't quite learn color theory fully. With that being said, let me show you how you can significantly improve your color theory in a week. Hey, I'm Stell, someone who is very eager to learn art that wasted a bunch of money on art school that ended up not actually teaching me much. So I'm taking matters into my own hands. I'm gonna be teaching myself and you the fundamentals of art, one topic a month.
I'll be providing you with some basic theory of the concept, the most effective practice I found to learn it, extra stuff I noticed while studying, and a full playlist of videos on this topic that I found the most helpful.
If you want to come along on the journey, please subscribe and like the video. Basic theory. What really is color theory? It's the theory behind how colors interact with each other. If you do digital art, you're likely familiar with the properties of a color we have in the color picker: hue, saturation, and brightness. All colors interact with each other's different hues, saturations, and brightnesses in all kinds of different ways. The main thing that gives interesting dynamics is contrast. That's what we want in our art. There's several different types of contrast based on these three color properties. Hue. Cold versus warm. When shifting the hue slider, you need to think about the contrast of cold and warm colors. Colds are blues and violets. Warms are reds, oranges, and yellows. Saturation. Saturated and desaturated colors contrast each other. Brightness. The contrast of light versus dark. Both brightness and saturation are really useful to pull your viewer's attention where you want it to be. Now you need to think of all three of these properties for every relation between any two colors. For example, here's a pair of colors. Don't see them as just blue and yellow. See them as their hue, saturation, and brightness. This specific blue is colder, less saturated, and darker than this yellow. And this specific shade of yellow is warmer, more saturated, and brighter than this other shade of blue.
This was a really easy example that I used to illustrate my point. But in practice, there's going to be much more nuance in these color comparisons. The best way I've found to compare colors is by using the square color picker. Once you get the hang of it, it's really simple. The circle slider changes hue, going left or right changes saturation, and going up and down changes brightness.
Seeing color this way is the only way that's helped me actually understand color relations.
Besides contrasts, another really important color relation that will let you choose colors that are pleasing together is color harmony. I'm sure you've already heard of it. There are colors that just click together and make sense when you put them next to each other. There's many kinds of color harmonies, but the easiest one for me to use is complementary. It's really easy to find on the wheel. It's just colors that are right across from each other. Don't just use the most saturated versions of two complementaries. Play around with their saturation and brightness to get more interesting results. Now, all of these color relations exist in some sort of color context. What do I mean by this? Well, simply put, you can't isolate a color from its environment. It has to make sense and go well with the hue, saturation, and brightness of the overall image.
How can you actually apply this? You got the basics of the theory, but what now? Well, I'm not the ultimate authority on color theory. In fact, I'm still studying it, so I can't quite engrave it into your brain in a 10-minute video. But I can show you how to study it and give you the practices and resources I've found to be the most helpful. Practice. Through lots of trial and error and working out what's most effective, I've set up a few rules for my own practicing color theory. Rule number 1. Using a reference image. Don't say you don't need it, and don't feel bad for using it. It makes one hell of a difference and gives you something to learn from. You don't need to replicate it perfectly. It's just there as a guide. In the description, I've left a collection of sites that I've found helpful for finding references. Now, what kinds of references should you be looking for? I recommend starting with landscapes and still lifes, since they're the simplest to replicate. If you're up for a challenge, you could use figures or portrait references. And as a final boss, you can pick a piece from an artist whose color work you really like, and try to replicate their color use to see how they did it. If you do end up posting these studies online, make sure that the artist is okay with it and credit them properly. Rule number 2, no color picking. The whole point of this exercise is to learn the relationships of different colors, and color picking is like cheating. You gotta find the relationships yourself. That's when your brain absorbs the information. It's only okay to color pick a couple of times to compare your colors and get a feeling of how close they are to the actual reference. Rule number 3, have a timer. I will forever swear by this rule. Having a timer will help you stay focused on the bigger picture and not zooming in on the tiny details. It will force you to think in big shapes and get the general idea of the whole image first. The timer also helps remind you that this is just a study. It's not going to be perfect. Its purpose is for you to learn from it, not for it to look amazing. I usually do 1 or 2 hours on my timer, and if I'm really enjoying the study, I'll sometimes even extend it to 4 hours. But the goal is to be quick and efficient. By doing these reference studies, you'll develop your sense of color and be able to apply it better to your own drawing and painting.
I only managed to do a few of them. I think about 10 in total, but I've learned so much from them. Color is extremely nuanced and takes a lot of trial and error to get right. I've always found that reading and watching theory won't actually produce any results if you don't have a way to practice it. Learning these concepts is much more effective if you have a hands-on approach, even if it's terrible at first. So give this way of practicing a try to see how much your color understanding changes. If you manage to do 1 study a day for just an hour or 2, you'll definitely notice yourself improving.
Other tidbits I've noticed. You can consciously exaggerate color relations to make your painting more alive and interesting than the photo reference. Think of the 3 contrasts I mentioned and try pushing them further when you notice them in your references. There's a lovely Twitter post by the artist on screen explaining this concept that I will link in the description. Don't be afraid of using really dark or really saturated tones for your contrasts to work. These need to exist for your painting to have substance. Let's compare my painting without really dark or saturated tones and the one that uses them. It just does not pop. Don't be afraid of making a mess. Fear is your worst enemy, actually. The end result is practically irrelevant, and what you learn will be invaluable. In practicality, if you let fear take over, you'll only end up paralyzed and won't get any studies done. Only when you have the courage to mess up will you actually discover yourself improving. But we are still human and result-oriented, so if you want to quickly improve your drawing, you can play around with brightness, contrast, and saturation sliders until you like it better. A really important thing to remember is to have a good time. If you see that your mood is getting worse while studying, take a break and come back to it later. It won't go anywhere. It's important to have fun while doing this. In your own work, use references, and extensively. They're such a game changer. I've left a few links to my favorite places to get references in the description. More theory. My brief explanation was good, I think, but there are way more knowledgeable artists out there that helped me with these concepts. Before you actually practice, I suggest that you first watch the videos that I've found the most helpful during my time studying color theory. I put them all in a playlist in the description. If this video was informative, please like it and subscribe. I know that was a lot of information at once, so I've left a brief summary in the pinned comment of this video for you to review what you learned today. Please reply to it if you have any suggestions. And if you have any questions, I encourage you to join my Discord server and ask them, and I'll try to help to the best of my ability. If you'd like to see more of my art, you can check out my other socials listed in my link tree, or just search Stellora on most platforms. And finally, if you really like what I do, you could support the channel by buying me a coffee. Thank you for staying until the end, and happy painting!